We're going to get a chance now to kind of shift our focus to servant leadership. Ronnie Andrews, if you think of words, he's in my group. If you think of words that describe the business side of Ronnie, you come up with things like genomic and cancer research and biotech and big words like the human genome. But if you think about Ronnie as a person and you know the human side, the real life, everyday side of Ronnie, you come up with words like Bible and God and Jesus and people, because that's what he really cares about. He's using the vehicle of the human genome and these companies that he's been working for, General Electric, now president of Medical Sciences, $4 billion company. He's using these companies as a vehicle that God uses to reach people. And I was looking in this little Jesus CEO book written by Lori Beth Jones this morning, and she writes, here's what Jesus did not do. He did not write a letter to the, quote, chairman of the board, God, and say, "Dear God, I've completed my task here on earth. I've raised the dead, turned water into wine, multiplied the loaves and fishes, and reduced the number on sick leave." What he did say is, "Dear chairman of the board, alias God, as proof of my good work here on earth, I present to you Peter, James, John, Mary Magdalene, Martha, completed in love." And whenever Ronnie and I spend time talking, he talks about the people that he's going to present to God someday. So welcome with me, Ronnie Andrews.
Thank you, Greg. And I hope I can live up to that introduction. But listen, when I told Chris I was going to do this a few months ago, I was happily employed at the company that I had started 8 years ago called Precedent. You guys may remember from last year, we had an amazing run. God had blessed us beyond measure. We had been able to build a company from nothing to $150 million, growing very rapidly, touching over 500,000 people with cancer in a very special way. And we had been able to create a servant leadership culture that honors God, and we were very bold, even though we were a public company, about the fact that we were faith-based. That company, you may remember, won top place to work in healthcare, modern healthcare in 2010, and was the greatest accolade of that year, despite the $600 million acquisition of Clariant by GE. A year goes by in my role, and I find myself sitting in my office one day, and I realized that, you know what? The ministry here, the church of Clariant, was really pretty well established. And there were many folks in the company that had passion for servant leadership, had passion for God. The Bible studies in the company were working effectively. The company was growing, and there was just a great sense of peace and confidence in that company. And I found myself extremely comfortable. Rick Green, at one of our convene meetings during the November-December timeframe, told me, "You're not good when you're comfortable," and he was right. And I got a phone call from the CEO of Life Technologies, who is a $4 billion company. Sorry about that. Sorry. Anyway, he called me, and he said, "Ronnie, I want you to come talk to me." And I went and chatted with him. And they were getting ready to announce, which they did in January, that they were getting ready to tell the world in January that by the end of this year, we will have a $1,000 human genome in 2-hour capability. And that they were going to be launching this technology to the world, and that he needed someone to come and champion that to ensure that that launch of the Human Genome Project would manifest in good for people. So I went back home the week before Christmas and began to pray about it and began to think about it, and wasn't sure I wanted to leave my safety net of Clariant to go back into the big world of corporate America, which I had been in most of my life. But through a series of events and the death of a little 12-year-old girl with an inoperable brain tumor that was very close to us, I decided that God was calling me out of my comfort zone and calling me back to a new company. And so in January, I said yes, that I'd go do this, took a sabbatical, which I desperately needed. I encourage that for all of you in this room. If you don't get away with your spouse for a 2-week period, and I encourage you 2 weeks. I'd never done this in my whole life. I'd never taken 2 weeks at once. And I went, and the first 4 days, I had to detox because I was used to getting mail, and I was used to getting, email and BlackBerry, and I had no company anymore, so I had nobody to call me. I felt lonely. By day 4, I was realizing it wasn't so bad. By day 5, I figured out I still really liked my wife, and she still really liked me. And the second week, it was amazing. And I get back to about 1,000 emails of people going, "Where are you? What are you doing? Why haven't you called me?" So if any of you in the room emailed me in that period, I apologize. But so I come to you today as someone who is standing in the face of the next round of creating a servant leadership culture, only this time in a company with 10,000 employees, on fire technologically, but absolutely dead spiritually in this company. And so Rick asked me this morning, he said, "Well, what do you think?" I said, "You know what? The business challenges are going to be absolutely enormous, but the ministry opportunity is incredible." You know, I feel like that guy, you know, the sales story. We just had a great talk on sales by Craig, and you know, the 2 guys that went to Africa, the shoe salesman, one calls back and says, "Don't, friggin' get me out of here. There's nobody wearing shoes." The other guy says, "Hey, get the manufacturing plant going because there's nobody here got shoes," right? And that's kind of how I look at this. I'm going into a 10,000 employee company, and we are getting ready to institutionalize servant leadership. So what I'm going to talk to you about very rapidly in the next 8 to 10 minutes is something that I've done now in 3 different companies, but now I'm getting ready to get the ultimate test of it, and that is, how do you implement servant leadership? So I forgot, I got to have my little trusty thing here. First off, I don't think this needs to be said in this room, but I always start with this slide when I'm giving this talk, no matter if it's a secular audience or a spiritual audience, is that, the greatest leader of all time, in his greatest hour of need, got on his knees and washed his disciples' feet. And if it's good enough for that guy, it's good enough for me. And he says, "I didn't come here to be served, I came here to serve." So servant leadership is absolutely the way to make it happen. But now what I've done in the last 30 days as I was preparing for my new role is really realizing what I've been preaching to people for the last, really 3 or 4 years as I've really gone out and taught servant leadership, and that is this: it starts with you. My grandmother, you can tell from the accent, I grew up in Georgia, so unfortunately I can't go back with Craig tonight because I'd love to go see my mom, but because we are here now. But my grandmother, 7th grade graduate, but a woman of amazing wisdom, and a woman that influenced me in my life to go after breast cancer because she lived with it for 36 years, 4 different times. And her faith and her belief in God's healing power kept her alive for 36 years in an era where we didn't know how to cure breast cancer. But she told me this, and I always enjoyed it. She said, "Ronnie, if people's words and their behavior don't match, believe their behavior." So as a servant leader, as I began to prepare my heart and my mind and my soul to take on this new role, I really began to look at these commitments, and that is a commitment to lead like Jesus, to understand that the most persistent barrier to servant leadership is a heart influenced by self-interest, putting my interest before others. How do I acquiesce my ego? One of my prayers every morning is, "Lord, take my pride and my ego and shrink it in the shadow of your cross so that you can be glorified." And I have to say that every morning because God has amazingly blessed a dumb country boy from Georgia. And I know I'd say that, but I don't think Daryl's in the audience. He loves it when I say that. He likes to get on to me. But as a country boy from Georgia, to think that I've ended up in the roles that I've ended up in life is truly a God story. It's not a Ronnie story. It's the little that I've done, but be in the right place at the right time and say yes to him when he's asked me to do things. And it begins with personal leadership, and that's an honest assessment of what your personal leadership brand is. When people see that you're coming to a meeting, do they go, "Oh my God, Ronnie's coming to a meeting," or do they go, "All right, Ronnie's coming to the meeting"? Remember last year, if you were here, I said this, and I say this frequently, there's 2 types of people in the world, right? 2 people that brighten the room when they walk in, and people that brighten it when the door hits them in the fanny on the way out. And the too many Christian leaders are the latter. We have everything in the world to be excited about, everything in the world to be motivated about, everything in the world to be confident about, and we run around like we've been sucking on lemons. So I have to get my head right? I have to figure out what is my brand. When I walk in to this new role as president of $2 billion worth of business in a $4 billion company, and I stand up in front of 10,000 people like we did yesterday at the big town hall that was broadcast throughout the company, I had to know what is the brand I'm bringing to play with that day, and what is the message that I want to deliver, and what I want those people to take out of there. And it wasn't that I'm a great business leader, because there's plenty of people that I know that will argue that I'm not. But what I wanted them to understand is that my job, my only job, is to create strategy and vision, and to hire the right people and empower those people, and to believe in those people, trust them, motivate them, nurture them, mentor them, and love them. And that is a message that you can stand up boldly and say in a secular public company like I'm in today, or in your own company that you built on a Christian foundation. But then you have to think about, how do we lead in one-on-one relationships? And then from there, how do we lead with a team? So as we think about servant leadership, I keep wanting to do it there, sorry. I ask yourself, this question: are you ready? Are you prepared? Many of you are already leading this way. So I encourage you to take a step back, though, take a deep breath, and are you prepared? And study the leadership traits of Christ. And at 35 years old, when I sat across from my pastor at that time, Little's Church in Chicago, outside of Chicago, and I was telling him, hey, I'm thinking about going into the ministry, and he pounded the table and looked at me and said, don't you ever say that to me again. You are in the ministry. He said, God has uniquely gifted you with an amazing aptitude for the sciences, molecular biology, and genomics, but he's also giving you the heart for people. He said, you are in a ministry that I will never be able to touch. And he was so right, that the marketplace is the greatest mission field, in my opinion, in the United States. So you have to understand the differences between power-based leadership, servant leadership. I got some of my friends, did a 360, how am I doing today? What are my gaps? And then take a long weekend, fast and pray, and get yourself ready. Because the minute you walk in and declare, I'm going to implement servant leadership, you are on display for all of your employees to watch, and they will watch every move, especially the ones that are not Christians. Because they want to see how you react in adversity. Because they want to see you act like them. Because misery loves company. And I tell my kids, it's a lot easier if you're down to pull somebody down than it is if you're standing up to pull somebody up, because gravity is against you. And so when you have the negativity of Satan working in the lives of people in your company, you have to be above that, and you have to be stronger than that, so you better be on your knees a lot and be prepared. I'm going to jump ahead real quick just because of time's sake, and I want to give you guys a chance to see something that we did, because once you prepare yourself and you prepare your staff, the next thing to do is institutionalize servant leadership. And so at Clarion, we actually hired a lady named Diane Brown from a program called the Talent Journey. She's here in Carlsbad, California. Amazing woman of God, prayer warrior with me in my office often. And she and I and a couple of members of my staff put together a tool. And that tool was a training tool that we used at Clarion to implement servant leadership. And every employee went through this. And the way we cascaded it was like this. First off, most of you probably already believe in this, but if you don't, just something that's been near and dear to my heart. When I was coming up as a young leader in a big corporation, I thought that I was, how good I was as a leader was determined by how many people reported to me, right? So one time in my career at 35, 36, I had 24 people reporting to me. Now, I thought I was on top of the world, and I was really something. Now at 53, I look back and thought, what an idiot I was. First off, my life was miserable because I had no time for my wife and my kids. But more importantly, that isn't leadership, that's management, right? Because you cannot afford to spend quality time mentoring 23 people. So now I have a rule. My leaders can have no more than 8 people reporting to them. And the reason I say 8 people, because I figure you can find 8 hours a week to spend 1 hour a week with each one of those people that you're mentoring. It's the Jesus model, right? In 3 years, he gave a vision and spent his time mentoring his team, and then gave them a compelling vision. And in 2,000 years, it's the only enterprise that's grown in double digits every year, right? That's sustainable leadership. So again, good enough for Jesus, good enough for me. So what we did is we took the opportunity to institutionalize servant leadership. So I'm just going to show you a little bit about what we did. This became an online tool that we used to execute servant leadership at Clarion. And you'll see we laid out what is servant leadership, what about Clarion, about our company and our values. What's servant leadership mean to us at Clarion? Behaviors, how to try those on, how to role play those. Servant leadership versus power leadership. I always like to call in contrast the behaviors of a servant leader versus a power-based leader, because they're extremely opposite. And it's important that you understand the difference. And then what about success? Because listen, Clarion's not about a big feel-good company. It's about how do we succeed at business. And that's the thing that I think is most important about servant leadership. And then what is your role in here? So this training program, and I don't have time to go through it all, but it really had modules on each of these and talked about who are we, our passion, our purpose, and people. And again, I'm happy to share this with you at the break, and I would encourage you to think about institutionalizing servant leadership if you can. If we can flip back to my set of slides, I just want to close with a couple of key points. So once you do this and you understand where your organization is today and you implement servant leadership, the last bullet point for time's sake on this slide is the most important one. Reward, servitude, and humility. Reward it. Call it out. Even if they make a mistake. The greatest opportunity I had to reward servitude and humility at Clarion happened in the second year of Clarion. We had a major foul-up in the lab. I went into the lab. There was a huddle around the leader of the lab, and she was ripping out some guy. And I stepped into the huddle, and I said, hey, what happened? And this guy stepped into the center of the ring and said, I made a mistake. And I said, yeah, what happened? He said, here it is. I said, all right, guys, well, let's stop. We're all moving fast. What did you just learn from that? And we took the next 10 minutes to digest it, to dissect it, and understand what it was. And at the end, I went up and hugged him and told him that I loved him because of his honesty, his transparency. And I said, now let's get back to work and get it fixed, right? And you need to take those moments, those aha moments in your organization as you're walking around and reward it. Yeah, you can give out awards, and that's cool, but sometimes just telling somebody you're proud of them for doing the right thing and hugging them means more to them and helps create it. So what does all this mean? What is servant leadership, and why did we do it, and what's the byproduct? Well, there's a kingdom payoff, right? Let me tell you what, the greatest mission field in the United States today is the marketplace. I mean, you can look at what happened to Wall Street over the last 5 years, and you can look at the absolute the competition that's going on right now for the next administration, and you can hear the battles that were raging. And our country needs godly leadership in the business world. We need it. And we as Christians should not sit back in the closet and watch. We should step out boldly and be who we are in the marketplace and lead like Jesus. And that's very, very critical for us. The other thing that I wanted to show you here was if you think about the fact that you guys know, I got all my slide build. Here we go. You guys recognize this guy, Jim Collins. You've all read probably Good to Great. If you haven't, I recommend you get it. But if you get Good to Great and you read it, and you haven't read Built to Last, get Built to Last and read it. It's an amazing book and talks a lot about servant leadership things, but he doesn't really call that out there. Good to Great companies in his book got a 17.5% return. That's a good return over the time period that he was looking at. And they did that because they clearly identified their passion and their purpose. There's a book out called 7 Pillars of Servant Leadership. I encourage you to get it and read it. It's a great book because it takes the same type of didactic background that Jim Collins used to identify great companies, and these guys look at servant leadership companies, and here's some of the companies that they look at. You know, Greg, I'm sure is proud to see Service Masters at the top of that list. But if you look at this, the percent return of the S&P over this period was 10.8. The percent return of Jim Collins' companies was 17.5. And the servant leadership companies were 24.2. So my hypothesis is that if we model the wisdom of Christ in the marketplace, then we will be able to not only impact the kingdom for God, we'll be able to build sustainable, amazing companies. And I want to read this in closing. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, right? How we walk the talk in our companies. But if you harbor bitter and selfish ambition in your hearts, don't boast about it. For where there is envy and self-ambition, there you will find disorder. When I look at the companies that I've worked for and the poor business decisions that have been made through the years, it is jealousy and envy and self-ambition that have caused those decisions to be made. Some leader decided that they didn't like it, that their idea wasn't the best idea, and they did it anyway, instead of using their team's knowledge base to glean and consensus around the right idea. And they marched forward, and those mistakes killed those companies, and I can tell you many, many examples of that. And then you find the absolute traits of a servant leader. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is pure, peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy, good fruit, impartial, and sincere. And I just say this, that if you take those words of wisdom, you don't think of anything else I said today, but you take that back and you be that person in your marketplace, you will touch people and you will have people asking you what's different about you, and that will allow you to fulfill that verse I showed earlier from 1 Peter. So I appreciate your time today. Here's some resources for you if you're interested, and you guys look forward to a great conference. Thank you.